Words, strew a few together, and you're on the way to a story. People almost always underestimate the power of a story. A story can transport you to new worlds, while making you feel the most indescribable joy. You can journey across dimensions, and be horrified at the grotesque creations those words have conjured in your mind. Here at Flash Fiction, we want to bring you a new story every week. We want our stories to awaken feelings you never expected, to send you to new places, and every once in a while, evoke a little bit of terror. Sometimes your heart will be racing, sometimes you will cry, but we want you to feel something every week. Before we get to this week's story, we'd really appreciate it if you liked, shared, and subscribed. It really helps us out.
He was sitting on a park bench in broad daylight. To say that he looked out of place would be an understatement. If this would have been Halloween night, maybe he would have fit right in. But it was June 17th. A small crowd had begun to gather. Some were taking pictures with their phones. Many were whispering amongst themselves. Someone had called the police because they had just arrived.
Excuse me, sir?
The man on the bench didn't move.
Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to put that weapon down.
The man was holding a scythe with a blade at least 2 feet long. You could see the reflections of light coming off of it, drawing brilliant displays on the sidewalk. The wooden handle was old and crooked and had to be over 5 feet tall. He didn't drop the weapon, though. Keith Mueller pulled out a taser from the holster on his hip and aimed it at the man.
Sir, I won't ask you again. Please put down the weapon and take off the mask.
The man on the bench raised his head at this and looked towards the officer. His hood obscured most of his features, but the rubbery skeleton mask looked so realistic.
Who said that it was a mask at all, Keith?
He reached up and pulled his hood down to his shoulders, and an audible gasp could be heard from the still-growing crowd. If he was wearing a mask, it was a damn good one. It looked as if he just had a skeleton for a head. Keith had stumbled backwards, almost falling before catching himself.
How do you know my name?
The man stood up.
I know everyone's name.
He took a step towards the officer.
You think I'm here to take away your pain?
Keith took a step backwards.
Sir, you need to stop right there.
The man took another step forward and Keith pulled the trigger. 2 prongs flew out of the device and hit the man right in the center of his chest, but nothing happened. The crowd had grown even larger. News vans had shown up. Cameras were focused on the man in the long black cloak in the center of the park.
You see, I'm tired.
He looked around the still-growing crowd inside.
In the beginning, it was easy. People were always afraid of me, but they welcomed me because I was a release from their pain. The pain of growing old, the pain of losing a child, the pain of a gruesome injury. I was happy to be their savior, even if they didn't realize it.
He shook his skull and took another step towards Keith.
Over time, though, people began abusing me for their own gain. They'd inflict unbearable pain on each other, knowing I would come release them from their misery. Then there would be people like you.
He pointed his scythe at Keith and took another step towards him. Keith had gone almost completely pale and took another step backwards.
I wish you were unique, but there are so many like you. You put on this facade of good deeds, but you go home at night and beat your wife. Then you feel guilty about it and try to drink until you can't remember what you've done.
Another step closer.
Except then you go home in your drunken stupor, and you climb into bed with the woman you just gave a concussion to, and try fondling her, hoping to get some sexual satisfaction because you're the husband and you deserve it.
Another step.
But she acts like she's asleep because the mere thought of you disgusts her, so you roll off the bed, a mixture of anger and shame, and decide to satisfy yourself in a different way. You go to your daughter's room.
He moves closer still.
She has been awake since you walked in the door, afraid this moment would come, hoping it wouldn't. She heard the door open behind her. She could smell the alcohol coming from your clothes and your breath, and she tries to act like she's asleep too.
Another step, and the man is almost on top of Keith, now whispering to him.
You don't care that she's sleeping, though. You wake her up. You molest your own daughter. You tell her how much you love her while you're doing it, while she's crying.
Tears are streaming down Keith's face. He stops and waits for the man as he takes another step closer.
You wake up in the morning and beg for me to come release you from your guilt. You're so selfish, all you care about is your pain. You don't even consider the trauma you're inflicting on those you supposedly love.
The man raised the scythe above his head.
You hope I will come and end your suffering, that I will finally stop your pain.
The man swung the scythe swiftly towards Keith's neck. Keith closed his eyes and waited.
But as I said, I'm tired. I have no desire to continue giving people the release they think they need.
Keith opened his eyes. The man was standing in front of him, the scythe inches from his neck.
Consider this my retirement.
He dropped his scythe on the ground.
You'll just have to live with the pain.
The man and his scythe faded out of sight. It was broadcast on all of the major news networks. Everyone remembers June 17, 2035. It was the day the world realized there was a difference between immortality and invincibility.